up generally at 5:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock. And I usually went out in the backyard. Depends on whether you're talking about summer or winter, but in the summer and the spring, I'd go out in the back field and spade the yard. We had about an acre of land that I would spade and get ready for growing crops. We had to supposedly have a victory garden. So we had a victory garden that was big enough to supply our family all year round. And then I would, if it was during the school months, I would be at the bus stop at 7 o'clock in the morning and go to school. I had about 6 major subjects, and then I would catch the 3 o'clock or 3:30 bus home. And upon getting home, my dad and my mom both worked, and so in those days they didn't have pressure cookers or microwaves or some of the more modern things. And so since my mom and dad worked, I was the one who got to make all the meals. And I was around 12 years old then. So that's even before the spading and things I was talking about, the victory garden. And you would always have to have your meal started at least an hour before dinner, which meant peeling the potatoes and getting the meat seared and getting it all prepared, and then cooking it and having it ready, having everything ready at the same time when your folks got home. And then in the evening, we didn't have TV or computers or anything like that, so we would listen to the radio, and some of my favorite programs were The Lone Ranger and Batman and Green Hornet.
Interesting. So you couldn't just pop something in the microwave?
Nope.
Yeah.
No such thing.
That's interesting.
Even if you wanted some cookies or some cinnamon rolls, you very rarely, or you could buy them from the grocery store, but you didn't have enough money to buy things from the grocery store, so you made everything from scratch.
Yeah.
And consequently, it took a long time.
So life was a lot less comfortable. A lot more work had to be done.
Oh yeah, you had to do, when harvest time came, you had to do your canning, and then we didn't even have freezing of vegetables figured out at that time, so most everything was canned, and fruits and vegetables and meats and eggs and fruits. There are a lot of different fruits that you can.
And do you still put things in jars downstairs?
Yes.
Yeah. What did you think life would be like in the year 2000? What kind of technological advances did you think we'd have in the year 2000 when you were a teenager?
Well, I kind of went along with this idea of what scientists presented, fancy automobiles and traveling in space, and of course a lot of airplanes, a lot of rockets, a lot of spaceships. We, at the age of 12 to 15, it was quite common to think of air travel and what have you, but it was a long way off. And then when I was 16, I used to watch the airplanes practicing over our property, and the Mustang and the different planes of that particular period, like the B-38 had a twin fuselage, and we just thought that was out of this world. I was about 14 then. I was maybe 13 or 14. And most all your comic books kind of went ahead and were talking about space travel and things. So, and then when World War II came, at the end of World War II, we had missiles, and we had the jet planes just coming into existence. So we could see you know, as time went on, from being a youngster, we could see how these things really scientifically were being developed all the time.
Interesting. What were some of your hobbies as a teenager?
I had everything as a hobby. I used to collect skins. I used off of hides, off of animals, and tan them. And then I would also take a number of smaller animals and put them in denatured alcohol and preserve them so you could sort of have like a scientific room. I had a whole garage to myself. And so I had toads and frogs and lizards and things, snakes, all kind of preserved in wood alcohol.
That's cool.
Denatured alcohol. I had a butterfly collection. I had a stamp collection. I had box top collection. I had milk bottle caps collection. Had a coin collection, a rock collection. And then when I got into the Navy, I had a sample of all the different parts of the world I went into. I took water samples and had those preserved in waterproof jars that I wanted to study when I got into college. And I collected bugs, and it just seemed like everything was of interest to me. So I was in scouting, and I went through all the different merit badges and was a junior assistant scoutmaster, and so I more or less was out right on top of all kinds of outdoor activities in the woods and hunting and fishing. And so my whole life was full of hobbies, so to speak.
Wow. Because you didn't have you didn't have television, right? So you couldn't get entertained by that. You had to kind of do things by yourself.
All the good radio programs I enjoyed were in the evening, so I was very busy all day with these other activities. Plus, during the school year, you had your homework and what have you.
What was your duty in World War II?
My duty?
Yeah. What did you do?
I was a radarman. I went into the Navy when I was 17, and they give you a test to see what kind of things you're qualified for. And you have an IQ, and you have all different kinds of tests. My eyesight was extremely good, and my intelligence was extremely high, and so they sent me to radar school. Radar school was probably 6 weeks or 6 months. No, it must have been 6 weeks. And I came out of radar school as a seaman first class, I guess it was, striking for radar. And so then I didn't actually get my ship until 1944, December 1944. I don't know, it might have been December of 44. You know, it had to be 43. And I was supposed to be watching, on my first ship. Again, because of my qualifications, they made me a helmsman, which steers the ship, and a sonar man and a radar man. And my cruise from San Francisco to Adak, Alaska, was so rough that I was absolutely seasick all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And one outstanding occasion was my beard grew, and wherever I went, I carried my bucket to make sure I had something to throw up in. And after about 10 days, I was totally beat. I couldn't eat. If I did eat, it all went overboard. And so this one particular night I was heading for my watch, and it was about 11:30 at night or something like that. And the captain went by and he said, "Looks like you're having a pretty rough time, Frame." I said, "Yes, I just can't get over this business of being seasick." And so he said, "Well, why don't you sleep in my cabin here?" And he had a cabin just off the bridge. And I went in there, and he had seal skins for blankets, and really cozy little room, you know, commander of the ship. And I was on a minesweeper. And he said, "Why don't you rest in here until you feel better, and then you can go on watch, which is at midnight." So, and then I get in that sack, I was sound asleep. And lo and behold, I didn't know at the time, but that my watch came, and I never showed up at 12:30 or 1 o'clock until they started searching the ship, and there was no Al Frame anyplace. And so eventually the officer of the deck logged me as lost overboard, because they had searched that entire ship, and I couldn't be found. And then one of the petty officers, when he was coming off watch at 4 o'clock in the morning, just happened to look in the captain's quarters, in the commander's quarters, whichever. And he saw me sleeping in the commander's bed. And he about came unglued. And since he had a rank over me, he was telling me how I was going to get court-martialed and on and on and on. And I said, "Well, sir, it so happens that the commander himself put me in bed and told me that when I woke up I could get on my watch. And I had no idea what time it is." So I looked in the logbook, and sure enough, they had logged me overboard about 1:30 in the morning.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
In my seasick days, the fellow, the commander on my minesweeper, was concerned about my duty as a Navy person. And, so there was a big lightweight cruiser in the bay one day, and apparently the different commanders talked back and forth, and they decided between themselves that maybe I better get put back to shoreside duty in the United States, or else get on a larger ship. And so they gave me the choice, and I guess they made the final decision, but anyhow, they put me on this larger ship. And I was never seasick after that.
Yeah, because so larger ship doesn't go back and forth as much. What, over the course of your life, what new inventions towards technology did you see come about, starting from the first one?
Well, cars, I was driving a lot of, I wasn't driving them, I was in them riding along because somebody else was driving, but a lot of the cars that I was first acquainted with was Model T Ford and a Model 1925 Buick and different things. And then when I lived in Hawaii, the Sputnik went overhead. It was still beep, beep, beep. And so I saw all the things in between the two, so to speak. Ancient cars and ancient airplanes. And in the early stages of the helicopter, a helicopter could never go over 3,000 feet. And yet we kept making new scientific discoveries and figuring out how to stay aloft longer and better. But the big thing was when the Sputnik went up, and we could see that the world was changing in a big hurry.
So all those fantasies as a child of going around spaceships, were it was more able to believe when you heard that Sputnik went into orbit.
Was that a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd just answer yes.
Yeah, okay.
I was able to see different kinds of airplanes coming into existence. I saw the Goose, which is one of the largest airplanes ever built, made out of wood.
Mm.
And I was familiar, see, I took, when I was 15, I took a course in aviation. And when you start out in the 9th grade, learning all the technical parts about an airplane, you were actually going to be flying an airplane when you were a senior.
Mm.
And so I had a pretty good education about aviation by the time I was 16, and so my focus was on science and progress that we could see being made. Big change always came after a war. You could always see scientific inventions take place. A huge advance in technical things was after World War II and after Civil War, of course.
Mm.
And then every time we would have some kind of a war, you would have bigger bombs or bigger planes,
Yeah.
or bigger tanks or things. You could always see things supposedly improving.
So, did you see the when they first broke the sound barrier with planes?
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Well, it was awesome, but they had a lot of stories about the breaking the sound barrier, how an airplane would blow up, or how it would be going so fast it would just disintegrate into dust. And they had all kinds of different stories, and yet that's generally what people were talking about, or people writing about. The ones who really knew what would take place were the ones that were actually studying space and sound and different things. And they still had, I forget what you call them, but anyhow, you had different areas where you had wind tunnels, and where you could study and see how a plane would travel at certain speeds. And so it wasn't any shock to me to hear about an airplane going faster than 800 miles an hour.
Mm.
And but when it got up to, we'll say, 2,200 miles an hour, they couldn't imagine a plane ever staying together. And yet we overcame those obstacles. It's just a matter of, all of science is a matter of seeing where the limitations are and then seeing if you can go beyond that.
So, when you got back from World War II, what was America like?
Well, we were, generally speaking, recovering from during the war, people weren't able to have sugar or tires for cars, gasoline, mayonnaise, butter, milk, all kinds of things. Nobody had radios or refrigerators or washing machines or furniture. If you bought a house, say that you were a newlywed and you bought a house right after the war, you might get a house that was reasonably priced, but you would have orange crates and apple boxes and different kinds of things to sit on. And one of the first pieces of furniture I made was out of some scrap wood. I made a sofa to sit on. Made some kind of stuffed tipped mattresses to sit on too. And I was making, right after the war, I was making something like 50 cents, 60 cents an hour. And it's not very much when you have a wife and a child. And I went to college right away after the war. And being a veteran, my education was paid. And so I spent most of my life in college. And generally speaking, I didn't have very much consideration for men, because while I was in the service, I found out that there were all kinds of cursing and swearing and dirty stories, and it seemed like the men if they weren't busy trying to kill the Japanese or the enemy, well then they were talking filthy language about women and their activities during liberty. And so when I was discharged, I didn't want to be part of the male race. I wanted to have a forest lookout station and be away from the world, so to speak, and watch for fires, and went in that direction. And so anyhow, I had a pretty sad outlook on mankind. I came to know Christ when I was 16, and then when I got in the Navy, I couldn't find any other Christians, and it was kind of a bleak world out there as far as spiritual things. Everything was dog eat dog, and especially the fellows acting like animals. And so my life just didn't fit in with theirs.
If you had one thing to say that everyone in the world would hear, what would you want that to be? What do you want? How do you want people to remember you?
Remember me? Well, it'd be nice just to know that they remember me as a Christian who stood for righteousness. And probably the greatest reward of all my life was seeing my own children and grandchildren come to know Christ as Savior. And in that, that's the greatest joy of all. Money and riches and traveling the world over. There's nothing that's satisfying in all of those things, but when your life is in Christ, each day is satisfying.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.